Our final presentation this morning is from Dr. Fiona Pienaar, who is the operations manager of the South within Place to Be, all the Place to Be people present. Not all of them, I guess, will have met you yet, but you're going to meet her. She's long experienced, 30 years teaching experience in private and in primary and secondary schools, in South Africa, in New Zealand, and now we're very lucky to say in the UK, in Place to Be.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be standing here talking. I can't say this is my favorite topic, but it's one that I'm passionate about. Self-harm, I like to say a few things about it before I start talking. It's a difficult topic. There's an audience out here. I don't know people. I don't know what your history is. I don't know your experience or knowledge around self-harm. So I'd just like to say up front, it's a challenging topic. If it triggers you in any way, then find someone to talk to or seek the support that you need. I also want to say I don't have any images on my presentation of self-harm. If you do want to see, obviously they're readily available on the internet. What I do have is images by children. I've got art interspersing my talk, art done by 8 to 12-year-old children in response to talking about stress and how they cope. So what they find stressful and how they cope. They did pieces of art over a few weeks, so I hope that you enjoy those as well. So it's not easy defining self-harm. I also want to acknowledge up front that there's some very, very well-known researchers and academics in the UK, some of whom I'm quoting their work here. And Nock has described self-harm as direct and deliberate bodily harm in the absence of suicidal intent that typically involves cutting or carving the skin. And you can see there that there are a lot of other ways we can describe or we can name self-harm, self-mutilation, self-injury, etc., etc. I think one of the things I want to do in my talk is ensure a little bit that we broaden our thinking about what self-harm is. I think perhaps we think that it is typically cutting, but there are a lot of other self-harm behaviors or behaviors that we can define as self-harm. From our perspective, mental health at Place to Be, we would say it's a non-verbal expression of emotion. So children, young people, adults not able to express what's going on for themselves using words, and that could be because they don't have the language, they're too young, they speak another language, it's too dangerous to say what they want to say, there's nobody listening, any of the above and many other reasons. Or a behavioral expression of psychological distress to seek relief from a terrible state of mind. And research shows us that the most common form of self-harm is cutting and carving on the arms, legs, and stomach with sharp instruments such as knives or razors. There's also research that shows us that suggests, should I say, that cutting other than on the arms indicates other mental health challenges, such as depression. So, just to broaden our thinking a little bit about it not just being cutting, and probably I'll intersperse here with my first experience of self-harm was probably about 13 years ago, counselling in a secondary school in New Zealand. And I'd been seeing a young girl of about 12 for about 6 weeks. I suppose that particular session she must have decided that she could trust me. And she said, "Oh, miss, can I show you something?" And she lifted up her shirt and she had this crisscross of cuts on her stomach and some on her low chest here as well. There hadn't been a lot of talk about self-harm in my training to be a counsellor, certainly not in my training to be a teacher. So I'm pretty sure I looked shocked. And I think back to that, which would have been around 2000, and where we are now, and there's a lot more publicity and awareness about self-harm, which I think is a good thing. I think there's a slight risky side to it as well, in that it's out there and young people know about it as a coping strategy, which I'll talk a little bit about. But these are also other behaviors that we might class as self-harm. So self-battery banging your head against the wall. And we know that very young children do that. Eating disorders have been classed as self-harm, obesity, overdosing, and so on. So Horton and his colleagues, he's another very well-known researcher on self-harm here in the UK, he's broken down the risk factors. Now, I always think it's very interesting to look at risk factors, but I think we should be careful of just limiting ourselves to what we see in risk factors. And you've heard talk from quite a few people this morning about the idea that challenges are really mostly in lower socioeconomic homes and environments. And again, here we have a risk factor, low socioeconomic status. And yes, it is a risk factor, but let's not forget that self-harm happens across all socioeconomic environments. Definitely more females, and for males, suicide, and that's across most countries. Your sexual orientation, so if you're not heterosexual and you are exploring other sexualities, or you are of another sexual orientation, it puts you more at risk. And restricted educational achievement. But then again, we know that very high achievers also engage in self-harm. And then these are the sorts of presenting issues that we deal with in Place to Be and as therapists, any of those: parental separation or divorce, adverse childhood experiences, and any of the others, and more that you see there. We also know that one of these events can tip a child or a young person into self-harming behavior, or a combination. And then the psychiatric and psychological factors, and you've heard about some of these this morning as well: mental health challenges, drug and alcohol misuse, and if you see down there near the bottom, perfectionism. And I do know in another high school I worked in Auckland, there were challenges with young people who were in your top achieving, expected to get your A category results at the end of school, who were engaging in self-harm. So what is the prevalence? Well, it's been described as a major public health concern nationally, and again by the World Health Organization internationally. I haven't got time to go into that, but in third world countries they worry about things like if they don't have access to drugs and alcohol, then they have problems with ingesting fertilizer as poison, and sort of really different things they're concerned about in third world countries in terms of self-harm. It's prevalent in adolescence, and the age of onset typically 12 to 14. However, we have documented cases of 7, 6-year-old children. And as I said earlier, very young children hit their heads against the wall when they are distressed. But here are some of the latest statistics. In the past year, NHS hospitals treated more than 18,000 girls, 4,600 boys between 10 and 19, a rise of 11% from the year before. Worryingly, even more worryingly, should I say, 10 to 14 age children rose from, you can see the numbers there, a rise of 30%. So I quickly want to just give a few slides here on a study that was done in 2012, last year, by Kidja and his other members of compatriots, how can I say? So 16 to 17-year-olds, there were 4,800, so a pretty big study. It was part of a longitudinal study. Young people they pick up at birth and they follow through. 905 had ever self-harmed. You can see 18, nearly 19%. High again, there it is, in females, and self-cutting, most commonly used method. Of those who reported self-harm, 25.3% wanted to die during most recent episode. Now, it's interesting, we often, I think there's a thinking that self-harm is not about suicide. That may be true. It is actually, as therapists, we would see it as a coping strategy. It's a way young people, and I'll just talk about young people, cope. It's a very dangerous coping strategy, and as therapists, we would be working with them to look at exploring and developing other coping strategies. But we do know through research and through talking to young people that the more you self-harm, the more likely it is that you have suicidal ideation or you're thinking or suicidal attempts. Oh, I'll just go back. That's another concern for us in the health and education fields and other fields, that a very low percentage of young people who do self-harm actually seek help, medical help. And there is the reporting of as the frequency of self-harm increases, so does the risk of suicidal thoughts and plans. So I think it's very interesting for us to look at what were the reasons young people gave for self-harming, and a very large percentage, 64.5%, to gain relief from terrible feelings. So if we think about that, it's the thinking perhaps in the head. Have you ever got into bed at night and you've got so many thoughts going around in your head and you can't stop them? And obviously we develop techniques and coping strategies to deal with that. And for young people, if they've got strong feelings or very intrusive thoughts, they may not have the coping strategies to know how to deal with it or the support. So often it's about gaining relief. So it distracts them. I've had young people say, when I see the blood, I know I'm alive. The pain distracts them from the thinking or the emotions. You can see there was a percentage of them wanting to die and wanting to show others how bad I was feeling, so trying to draw attention to what was going on for them. Again, the cutting was the most commonly used method across both genders. And you can see if they're teasing out the self-battery there, which can include biting yourself, pulling your hair out, or just pulling your hair to give yourself pain, and headbutting walls. And worryingly, I think nearly 50% said they felt better than before. So as a coping strategy, it works for half of the respondents. And some recent findings, which I think are really interesting, and one that I'll give you that I haven't put in here. More adolescents think about self-harm, we call them ideators, than act on it, enactors. And following on that, they're also saying that most self-harm slows down, or most young people stop self-harming naturally. But we are concerned about the ones that it doesn't, and that it becomes very dangerous. And again, there's that there are low rates of help seeking, and that anecdotally we're seeing a very big rise in self-harm as a way of coping. So this study was done with adolescents. I always think it's really good to try and get into understanding what exactly adolescents are saying. It's a really good study. So it's like a way of getting your emotions out, so releasing them. It's a focusing on something else, distracting yourself, other than what's making you angry. So you can see it is a coping strategy then. If I've been really stressed at school and I'm falling behind with schoolwork, but there's no one like I could talk to about it, so I would either withdraw from everyone or cut myself or something like that. I felt as if I needed a way out, but I couldn't find one. It was like I was looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, and I couldn't find it because it was so dark everywhere. You don't see the point of living when you're upset. It's confusing. So some of that is around the ability to think through your thoughts, to use your cognitions, to think abstractly, to think about possibilities about what you can do. So I hope you're starting to hear how important it is for young people to have coping strategies and a range of coping strategies and a support system. So what can we do? Well, I think it's really important that you think about how you're modeling your coping strategies to children that you're dealing with, whether that's your own children, whether it's the children you're working with, if you're a head teacher, if you're a teacher, if you're a therapist, whatever you're doing, how are you modeling coping strategies? I was involved in a big study in New Zealand which talked to children aged between 8 and 12 about stress. And I also asked them how they coped. And I was hopeful that they'd be able to identify teachers as being somebody they'd turn to. But under 25% of the participants said that they would speak to a teacher about when they were stressed. And a lot of that was around that they see teachers as being very stressed themselves. I like to tell a story about 2 8-year-old girls who were taking part in a focus group who said, yes, our teacher's really stressed. She shouts a lot. And so we spoke to her yesterday and suggested she should try yoga. Having been a teacher myself for a very long time, I do understand how you get stressed. And I think it has become increasingly stressful for teachers, but that's another topic. So it's about how we model our own coping strategies. Do you come home and do you open a bottle of wine, which is fine. I do that occasionally, have a glass of wine. But if it's the only coping strategy you've got, then that can be the default position for your child. If the only way you cope with stress in the classroom is by shouting, then that is something you are modeling. It's the significant caregivers in children's life that teach them coping strategies. On top of that, it's about us helping children to identify their coping strategies. So we actually need to point them out, because children actually have fantastic coping strategies. They have behavioral strategies, like young people will go and listen to music. They have social strategies, they'll phone a friend. They've got all sorts of strategies, but sometimes we need to actually help them identify them so they know they have a range. So when life throws things at them, as it's going to, they don't default to alcohol and other drugs or some other sort of self-harming behavior. They go, this is tough, what can I do? Okay, I don't know what to do, who can I turn to? So there's two things, the coping strategies, and then there's the who is my support system. I was going to say something about electronic communication, but I won't, because Tanya addressed it so well. All I will say is that I would really encourage parents not to let children and young people take electronic equipment into their bedrooms at night time. Just give them a break. The 24/7 communication is causing a lot of stress. It's about young people's relationships and children's relationships that they have not only with their primary caregivers but with other adults in their lives. It's about the support they can identify. And sometimes it has to be somebody other than you, not you as the parent, because sometimes the stress is in families. It's often in families. So it's important that they have got, even if you set somebody up for them to turn to, a friend, a neighbor, a grandparent, somebody that they can turn to. And primarily, it's about young people feeling connected, because young people who commit suicide and who feel they actually can't live in this world anymore are not connected. It's about making sure that they are connected. And it's also about knowing, I believe, what they find stressful. And sometimes that's about asking them, and sometimes it's about just watching. So to end with Place to Be, I couldn't be more thrilled to be working at Place to Be. I lived in New Zealand for 15, 16 years. I moved over last year, and I was in council education at the University of Auckland, and we used to hold up Place to Be as an example of what we wished we could have going on in primary schools in New Zealand. Secondary schools have counsellors, it's very entrenched over there, but primary schools, very, very early on. And so I used to put Place to Be up on the during my lectures, say, look at this organization, this is what we could do. And here I am, I find myself working for this organization. I couldn't be more passionate about it. It's the early intervention, it's teaching them about having a relationship with somebody and knowing that it is okay in life to say, I'm not coping, I actually need some help here. And we all need to be able to identify at least one person in our life that we can do that with. We offer support and education for teachers and other staff, and importantly, you've heard about some of the support for parents Simon spoke about. And we also have relationships with other agencies that we can refer on when we feel children need more support than we can offer them. So I'd like to end by saying that I think this organization is doing such good work in helping children develop coping strategies and to deal with stressors in their life so that we don't see an increase and we can start to look at a decrease in self-harm. Thank you very much.